Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. My name is Melissa Siegel. I'm a professor of migration studies, and this is a channel about all things migration. Today we're going to be looking at a migration snapshot of Sweden, and we're going to be doing this as part of course, our migration snapshot series where we look at different countries using the Atlas of Migration, which is from the European Commission Center of Migration and Demography. And what we'll do is look at some very specific indicators. So we'll look at population of immigrants and immigrants, we'll look at residence permits and visas issued, we'll look at asylum applications. We'll also look at one measure of irregular migration, as well as citizenship and naturalization in the country. We'll also look at some indicators of social inclusion and education and employment. So now let's jump right in and get started by first looking at the population in Sweden today. So we can see here that Sweden has a population of a little bit over 10 million people, and we can also see that 6% of those people are actually non-Swedish citizens who were born outside of the European Union. Now, 3% of that population are non-Swedish citizens who were born within the European Union. So around 9% of the Swedish population does not hold Swedish citizenship. Now, if we look at residence permits, here we can see the difference between residence permits by work, family, education, and other reasons, as well as those people who are on long-term residence permits. Now remember, European citizens would not need these, right? So here we see that family and other reasons are really the largest reason for migration for third country nationals to Sweden. And here we can really think of other reasons as, asylum applications and those who are under refugee status, those maybe who have also come through resettlement to Sweden. You can also see here that a large number of residence permits in 2019 were long-term residence permits. Now let's look at asylum applications between 2017 and 2020. Now, Sweden is a country that is known for accepting many asylum seekers, at least in a global context as well as in a European context. Now, between 2017 and 2020, you can see here the number of first-time applications, and you can see that while there are still more males than females, we do see a larger number of female applicants compared to perhaps other countries where we see a larger number of male first-time applicants. You can also see that the numbers in 2020 were a bit less than the years preceding them. This probably also has to do a bit more with the situation around COVID. Now, if we look at first instance decisions on asylum applications, you can see that actually a large percentage of the first instance decisions were rejected. So anywhere from 74% to 56% over this same time period. And those people that were able to receive a positive first instance decision, this was on grounds of the Geneva Convention or some other kind of subsidiary protection or humanitarian grounds. Now, of course, this is separate from the people that Sweden has agreed to directly just resettle into Sweden as refugees. Those people have already had a status determination happen, and then Sweden just receives those people already as refugees. So they would not be considered in this first instance decision statistics. Now we can also see here one possible measure of irregular migration. So what does that mean? We can look at the people or the number of people who were ordered to leave Sweden because they did not have permission to stay in Sweden any longer. and those who are recorded as actually leaving the country. And what you can see here is there's quite a big difference between the number of people who are told they are no longer allowed to stay in Sweden and the number of people who leave Sweden. So it's actually around 30% of the population that have actually left in each of the years. Now we can turn to looking at naturalizations. So what is naturalization? That is when someone who has a citizenship from another country gains citizenship in Sweden. What we can see here is naturalization over time, and what you can see very clearly is that non-EU citizens are gaining citizenship at a higher rate than EU citizens. That makes complete sense because EU citizens basically already have the same rights as Swedes while living in Sweden. So it's much more advantageous for someone coming from a third country to gain citizenship than for someone from another European country, even when they are eligible for citizenship. You can also see that the share of citizens who have acquired citizenship is clearly higher within the third country nationals, but in general we do see higher rates of citizenship acquisition in Sweden than maybe we see in other countries. Now we can turn to a couple of measures of social inclusion in Sweden, and the first one we can look at here is looking at net income. So if we look at income, we can look at this between nationals, EU immigrants as well as non-EU immigrants. And you can see that non-EU citizens have the lowest net income of all of the groups, with EU citizens in second place and then Swedish citizens with the highest net incomes. We see a similar pattern if we look at overcrowding rates as well as the risk of poverty and social exclusion and the risk of poverty for children. So in all of these cases, we see worse outcomes for immigrants across the board, with third country nationals generally having the worst outcomes or the highest risks of poverty and overcrowding here. So if we look at education, what you can see here is that EU immigrants actually have very high levels of education. And even when we compare them to the Swedish native population or Swedish nationals, we see that they actually have higher levels of education. Now, this is a bit different when we're looking at migrants who come from outside of the EU. We do see a substantial number of immigrants from outside of the EU, both with high levels of education, but also with quite low levels of education. And there's a smaller group that has this kind of medium level of education. Now, if we look at some of the figures around unemployment rates, what we can see quite clearly here is that Swedish nationals actually have quite good levels of employment. We also see here that European nationals also have pretty good levels of employment, and that the highest unemployment rates or the lowest employment rates are those of third country nationals. Now, if we look at this compared to education levels, we can see a similar pattern. So in general, people that have higher levels of education are doing quite well on the labor market, as well as those that have medium levels of education. And if we look at those that have lower levels of education, then actually European nationals are doing the best on the labor market. But what we see is a very strong correlation here across all of the categories between level of education and their success on the labor market. Now, I hope that just gave you a very quick look at the current migration situation in Sweden, or specifically the current immigration situation in Sweden. If you're interested in other country snapshots, you can check out that playlist here. And of course, if you like this video, please like, subscribe to the channel, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss any of my videos that I upload every week on different migration issues. And I hope to see you next time. Bye-bye.